As I was saying, it's a pleasure to discuss Loet's book, in specific the chapter 8. I already shared with you my slides. I will not share the screen because most of the slides are also a selection of the quotations of the book, which are supporting what the kind of topic I'm trying to deal with. But I think it's not necessary, as you already have the slides, to show them in the screen. The selection of quotations from the book lead me to underline how my presentation today is essentially epistemological, and the key point of this presentation is the focus on Karl Popper Word 3 of objective knowledge as the global systemic process in which all that is solid melts into communication and expectations, as from the title, shaping to scenario modeling horizon. You know the famous quotation by Marx and Engels about all that is solid melts into air. In this case, we are talking about the role of communication and expectations to contribute to everyday more and more and more intangible world we are living in. This intangible world of objective knowledge is in a certain way a bridge between the construction of the past and the invention of the future. So we very unusually act in the present, or if we act in the present in a way, we are acting in the present according to the idea of past and the idea of future we are coping with the horizon of the communication modeling the past and communication and modeling the horizon of the expectations, which we call the future. It's the first important for my, of course, for my presentation point I wanted to focus on today. Shifting between the construction of the past and the invention of the possible futures through the approach of the possible adjacence, as Stuart Kaufman taught us, the systemic communication process can be shaped word 3 as far as it is not human-centered. Luhmann already explained us why, because the more human-centered the communication is, the more subjectivity will be re-entered and then generating or increasing noise. Moreover, as Luhmann taught us, it is not a human being, if it is not a human being managing the communication, expectations, process, and selection, it's more viable because the level of noise would decrease. And it's also an example shown in Conway's Game of Life, in which we understand that the possible adjacents are a very huge number, but not a limitless number. And then the subjectivity of the observer could simply create problems and oversimplifications and reductionisms where the assessment and selection of the variety should be at a more objective knowledge level. Epistemologically, the selection of what I consider the key points of chapter 8, cannot escape the matter of interpretation, a priori or a posteriori, as shifts and re-entries between the constructed pasts and the visualized invented futures in a way interfere in the modeling of the interpretation. It's a key topic in hermeneutics Umberto Eco talked about. Drawing distinctions among hyper-incursive, incursive, recursive equations sets the scenes of the game and its rules. What I want to focus now is the concept of enormous numbers, also described by Dennett's book Freedom Evolves, in which You can talk about cellular automata. You can talk about human beings. You can, whatever approach you select to use epistemologically, you bump into an horizon of limited, also very, 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 very huge number of alternatives in the expectations and the possible adjacents. That is why we can quite easily quote Kant and Luhmann to work on rather this kind of aspect. But for example, Husserl's conceptions of Lebenswelt and of subject would be very poor to contribute to the development of word 3 as subjectivity in Husserl's vision strongly impacts on the construction of meaning since the Lebenswelt. Maybe you already know, all of you know what Luhmann did as a job before he became a professor. He was a public servant, specifically public manager in Germany, and one of his jobs was to assess the amount of the refunds for the survivors of the Nazi lager. What he immediately did was to remove the subjectivity in the storytellings he heard or read in the reports or interviews to the survivors, because the impact of the subjective dimension in the interviews and in the reports made it almost impossible to assess the refund. The way he did it led through the years to the system-environment paradigm we all know, in which human beings do not belong to the system, they rather belong to the environment, so they are out of the system. Human beings, in a certain way, just produce noise, as you know, at the human interaction level, human communication, organizational level, human communication, but in a way already switching to a more abstract level of communication. Finally, at the systemic level, human communication just becomes noise in the human perspective, we know. So word 3, objective knowledge, can be generated without a priori sociological and even worse, subjective interpretations, as far as the construction of meaning in the communication process evolves by drawing a distinction from the environmental noise. The borders of the system, you know, also Luhmann was very much interested in Spencer Brown's laws of form. I think our Jamie will talk about it in a few minutes when I finish my presentation. And so also to draw a distinction is a very crucial matter, and the key distinction is the systemic communication and noise of the environment. And whatever is noise of the environment is not word 3 in the approach I'm trying to share with you, the discussion I'm developing here. My final point for today is that it is not a matter to stand for a priori hermeneutics or operational measurement. No, it's not a matter of pro or contra. It's a matter that certainly data-driven big data research claim a non-a priori interpretation. Nonetheless, a kind of interpretation, economic, politological, sociological, philosophical, whatever, or also from the word taken for granted, described by Berger and Luckman, sorry, emerges. So we have the problem that to get to word 3, we need to skip the word taken for granted and the normal categories we usually use as human beings for observation. I conclude with a very, I hope, funny example about quoting Nostradamus. We all know him, you know, the guy of the prophecies who lived in the 16th century, and he was French. The legend says that he didn't have visions about the future, but he had a chance to travel through ages. let's suppose it is true. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying let's suppose it is true. So let's imagine now Nostradamus is observing us, and when he writes his quatrains, he needs to cope with some linguistic, logistic, geopolitical, technological matters. He's observing us, but he has no idea about what a skyscraper or a computer or a television set or the United States are. So as far as he can describe, he can observe and describe, the level of his description mirrors the level of his conceptual and categorizing framework, not the level of the scenario he's observing, or the organ is observing. That is why when we try to just follow data-driven interpretations, a posteriori interpretations, we risk to increase the risk of what Umberto Eco calls over-interpretations, which is what happened in a certain way with Nostradamus quatrains. So in practice, we need to balance a priori and a posteriori circular correction of the interpretation process to guarantee, in a certain way, in an addictive, adductive, not inductive, not deductive, rather adductive process of interpretation. Otherwise, the risk is that we don't have objective knowledge at word. I thank you for your attention, and thank you for your patience, and I'm here for comments and questions in 5 minutes as agreed. Thank you very much.